Today, we've pulled together a really fascinating stack of sources, all focused on an idea that, well, it kind of bridges ancient stories with modern psychology.
It does. It's this idea of a common language.
Exactly, a language shared by myths, by our dreams, and really by our own inner landscape. We're going to be diving into a psychological approach to mythology, and we're using the work of Dr. William Linn as our main guide here.
Hmm.
His central idea is that the great myths, the ones that last, they work because they tap into how our own psyche naturally processes and translates its own experience. So our mission today is to trace that translation process, from start to finish. How does our invisible psychological reality,
Our fears, our hopes.
all of it, yeah.
Yeah.
How does that get converted into something visible, something sensory we can engage with? Because that right there is the core skill for understanding any symbolic language.
And it all starts with one fundamental act. Projection. That's the critical starting point. Dr. Lin really emphasizes that our ability to connect with a story or a piece of art or a myth, it all depends on this building capacity we have to project our inner world onto something external.
Without that, a myth is just a story about some gods.
Right. It never becomes a wisdom story about you. So to get this, we really have to unpack two key mechanisms today. The first is projection, which is the foundational act.
Do you mean the inside on the outside?
Yep. And the second is mimesis. And that's the specific rule that governs why a certain feeling gets attached to a certain object.
Okay, so let's ground this idea of projection right away. Dr. Lin defines it pretty simply, right? It's just the way we see our inner states, our psychological or emotional stuff onto an outer sensory reality.
The world becomes a screen or a mirror.
Yeah, a mirror is a great way to put it. And the sources gave some incredible examples, like think about a pair of old, worn-out shoes. You don't just see leather and scuffs. You project a whole history onto them. You see the life of the person who wore them.
Like in Forrest Gump, those running shoes.
Exactly. You see the wear and tear, and you immediately project this immense journey, the miles, the life lived. The shoes become a vessel for that entire experience.
And it's not just about physical history. It's a mechanism for translating really deep emotional states. J.R.R. Tolkien, I mean, he was a master at creating worlds that just invite this kind of projection.
He had that one metaphor for aging.
Oh, it's just devastating. He described the feeling of growing old as being like too little jams spread over too much bread.
Oof.
And that feeling of your resources, your time, your energy,
Yeah.
just stretched so thin over all of your life's obligations, it's captured perfectly in that one image.
And the power of that image is the proof of the whole theory. If you, listening right now, instantly feel your own sense of being spread thin in that image of the jam, well, you're performing projection.
Right. You're translating an abstract inner feeling scarcity onto a simple physical analogy.
But hold on, a kid wouldn't necessarily feel sad about that, would they? They haven't had that experience of adult scarcity.
Exactly right. That's the key. The image has to be psychologically available to you. And that's why projection is the fundamental starting point here. It proves the premise. This sensory world, whether it's real or in a story or a dream, is a screen for the psyche.
But it's not a random screen.
Not at all.
Okay, so if we accept that we're constantly projecting, that leads to the next hurdle. Why that image? What makes the choice? Why does, say, melancholy feel like rain and not like a bright red fire hydrant?
And that is where the governing rule of mimesis comes into play. Projection isn't arbitrary. It's governed by this idea of mimesis, which is basically likeness.
Likeness.
Yeah, the sharing of some kind of essential pattern or shape between the inner feeling and the outer object.
We see that everywhere in the oldest symbols, don't we? We project the feeling of an ending of mortality onto the harvest.
Because the act of cutting down the crops, it mimes the pattern of death and dissolution.
And birth gets projected onto the sunrise.
Of course, they share the same pattern of emergence from darkness. There's another more startling example in the sources about the story of Siddhartha. He was apparently shielded from watching farmers plant crops
Why?
because it was understood that it was just too easy for people to project human sexuality onto that act. The plow breaking the earth, the seed being planted, the physical action so clearly mimes the pattern of sexual intimacy that the projection is almost automatic.
So that mimetic relationship is the foundation. And that shows mimesis isn't just for interpreting things, it's a tool for creating them.
That's the fascinating shift from psychology to art. And it takes us to the Romantic poets. Percy Shelley, for example. He believed mimesis was this technique that the greats, the Greek poets, Dante, Shakespeare, they all used it brilliantly.
But it had been lost in his time.
He thought so.
Yeah.
Shelley's idea was that mimesis lets a poet actively orchestrate inner experience in their audience. You don't state the feeling, you present an image that mimes the feeling. The audience does the work. They project their own experience onto your image.
The analogy Dr. Linn uses for this is so clear. Imagine that internal, invisible feeling of being restricted, held back from your own potential. Shelley's technique isn't to write, "I feel restricted." Instead, the poet would describe, say, a flower. It's just about to blossom, full of potential. But there's a thick rubber band wrapped tightly around its petals, stopping it from opening.
And by showing you the image of the bound flower, the poet is using mimesis. The image shares the exact pattern of constrained potential. The audience recognizes that pattern from their own life and projects their own feeling of restriction onto it.
You feel the pressure of that rubber band emotionally, not physically.
That is the core translation moment. It's proof that a writer can intentionally use a mimetic image to reliably trigger a specific psychological state. You turn an abstract idea into a felt reality.
Okay, so let's build on that. If one inner feeling can map to one outer image, what happens when that same feeling can map onto lots of different images? That's got to be where the richness of metaphor comes from.
It is. That's metaphorical layering. It's how symbols get their weight. Let's take a universal feeling, like needing to hide your true self, masking.
Yeah.
We can project that single feeling of, inauthenticity onto so many different things.
Like a performer wearing a literal mask.
Or a chameleon changing its skin color to blend in. Or, the sad clown putting on smiling makeup.
And in our world, a curated social media profile. Those perfect pictures that hide the messy reality.
Yes, and here's the insight. All those different images, the skin, the smile, the filtered photo, they become connected in this web of metaphor. They become like each other. Not because they look similar, but because our psyche projects the same inner experience of masking onto all of them.
This layering strengthens the opportunity for projection, which really is what a rich symbol is. The sources had that great film school example how a director could build a scene to make an audience think about mortality.
You just layer images that are mimetic of ending. So you show a kid playing an old video game, maybe Tetris, they lose. The screen flashes, game over.
The end of the game.
Right, and at the same time, outside the window, the sun is setting.
The end of the day.
And the whole scene is taking place at a funeral.
The end of a life.
Exactly. By layering those three different mimetic images, the game, the sun, the burial, the projection of ending becomes, it's overwhelming. You've hit that psychological note from three angles at once.
And this is what grounds those ancient symbols, like the woman's body being seen as a vessel.
Yes.
That single pattern containment, holding, potential, it gets projected onto Pandora's jar, the Holy Grail, an oven, a ship. They're powerful because they're all grounded in that same layered mimetic pattern. Symbols are psychologically dense for a reason.
Which brings us to the ultimate internal screen, the dream. So far, we've talked about projecting onto the outer world, but that world doesn't have to be physically real.
A sunset in a movie works just as well.
Or a mythical dragon. But the unique thing about a dream is that it's generated entirely by the psyche itself. Every mountain, every character, every single thing you see is created internally. So by definition, it's all psychological.
Which raises the big question. How does the psyche take an invisible, abstract conflict, like a fear you have, or a change you need to make, and translate that into the visible sensory story of a dream?
And the answer goes right back to our two mechanisms, mimesis and metaphor. They are the translation engine. They have this bilingual capacity. They can turn psyche into sensory experience, and just as important, turn sensory experience back into psyche.
So the skill that Percy Shelley used to write about the flower and the rubber band
is the exact same skill the psyche uses to write a dream every night. It's always turning these abstract conflicts into concrete visual stories so that we can explore them safely.
That's why stories like Alice in Wonderland or The Wizard of Oz feel so much like dream narratives. If Dorothy's whole journey is a dream, then the witch, the scarecrow, the road, they're all just parts of her own mind.
The psyche is translating her inner needs for courage, for intelligence, for a sense of home into visible characters and challenges. The abstract idea of finding self-reliance becomes the physical quest to defeat a witch.
So we study dreams to understand myth, because in a dream, the psyche is doing its own myth-making. It's revealing its symbolic language in its purest form.
And if we get fluent in that language, we can start to extract the much deeper wisdom that's coded into all those ancient mythologies.
And that fluency is the real payoff. It prepares you for this huge philosophical idea that you see across so many cultures, this idea of the world itself as a divine dream.
You see with Vishnu dreaming the cosmos into being, or the Aboriginal concept of dream time.
Which brings us back, finally, to Tolkien. He was obsessed with mythopoesis myth-making.
He was. Tolkien's argument was that God never actually stopped communicating divine wisdom. It was humanity that lost its ability to understand that mythopoeical language.
In his view, everything in our reality is just an expression of a divine dreamer. The same way everything in our dream is an expression of us.
So as an author, he saw his job as being a sub-creator, a dreaming God, translating his own moral wisdom into a metaphorical sensory world.
And his genius is in how he translates these huge philosophical concepts into pure visual metaphor. He never has to preach.
Let's just look at his symbolism for hoarding versus flow in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Tolkien clearly saw a selfish, constrained hoarding of power, of wealth, as a profound negative.
Okay, so how does he translate that abstract belief?
With powerful symbols. The ring is the perfect symbol of hoarded, constrained power, the closed circle. And then you have the dragon on his pile of gold and Mount Doom itself, a volcano. They're the ultimate symbols of this negative, destructive, selfish hoarding.
So if the philosophy is hoarding is bad and dissolving it creates positive flow, how do you show that visually?
Through the final action. The action has to mime the philosophical solution.
Right, so when the dragon is defeated or when the ring is finally destroyed, what happens?
The consolidated power, that rigid mountain, it breaks, it erupts, it flows outward as fire and lava. The hoarding ends, and the static power is released into dynamic movement.
He never has to write a sentence that says hoarding is bad.
Never. He just builds a world where the physics flow from that belief. The end of The Hobbit, the dragon breathing fire from the mountain, is perfectly mimed by the end of The Lord of the Rings, the volcano itself breaking open and breathing fire. He engineers the mimetic relationships perfectly.
So after all that, what does this deep dive mean for you? We've traced this core loop. Our psyche projects its inner experience based on mimesis, that shared pattern of likeness, that generates metaphor, which, over time, solidifies into powerful symbolism.
It's the language of dreams, and therefore it's the language of myth.
Which leaves us with a final thought, a pretty provocative one.
If we take this all the way to its philosophical conclusion, we have to go back to that idea. What if learning to interpret this translation of psyche into sensory experience? What if it isn't just about understanding our own dreams or old stories?
If so many myths portray reality itself as a kind of divine dream.
An expression of a profound intelligence. I mean, even an atheist like Stephen Hawking used that metaphor, the mind of God. So maybe, just maybe, the symbolic language we learn from our own dreams gives us the key, not just to interpreting our own mind, but to interpreting the language of the divine dream itself.
Now that is the kind of question that a true deep dive is all about.